So yeah, Toju, I'm Toju based in Dublin, and I has already done a very great introduction of myself. I also have my colleague here, Nega, who is a research scientist in the same organization I work in, which is Responsible AI in Google Research. And Nega will talk a bit more about robustness at the end of the presentation. So what will I cover today? Just want to define what we call responsible AI at Google. How do we look at it? What are the underlying principles which we work with? And Google has its AI principles. So I'll cover that a little bit. And I'll cover a couple of case studies of where we've applied responsible AI principles and work within Google. And last but not the least, we'll end off with a quick introduction on the robustness study. Cool, so what is responsible AI? Quite similar to the multifaceted industry in AI, where it's very difficult for everyone to agree on one single definition for AI. That's the same approach we have towards responsible AI. It's quite difficult for everyone to agree on what responsible AI or ethical AI actually means, which is totally understandable. So we'll stick with Alan Turing's definition, which is basically looking at different values that are employed to make sure we further the moral conduct when deploying AI systems or technologies. So that's a good plain field or foundation when we refer to responsible AI. Now, we strongly believe that if you're going to deploy any AI systems, for them to be successful, you need to have a strong element of responsible AI. And there are lots of reasons why ethics and responsibilities are important. Not only because it's the right thing to do, but of course it makes AI successful. So building responsibility into any of your AI deployments will help build trust, not only with your customers or our customers, but also with their customers' customers. And if this trust is broken, then of course it means that the risk of AI deployments will be stalled. And right now in today's world, we know that the trust in AI is quite small and it's quite poor, based on different surveys that different organizations have carried out. A lot of people do not trust AI. A lot of people feel that organizations deploying AI are infringing on their privacy and human rights. So that trust has already been broken. In other words, it means that we need to do some more work. And when I say we, I'm not just referring to Google, but everyone within the space working on AI systems need to do more work within gaining that trust of our users by employing a little bit more responsible AI frameworks in the work that we do. And this also fits within our beliefs at Google as well, that responsible AI equals successful AI. Right, so let's take a step back to Google's AI principles and how we look at responsible AI in Google. I think it's quite known that Google aspires to make sure that we create technologies that can be used by everyone in the world, with the aim of improving our daily lives. Now, as we know, it's one thing to have principles and practices, but it's another thing to actually implement them or operationalize them. With every organization that works with principles, it's very hard to implement. It's very hard to deploy these principles across product teams and to measure the success. Are we admitted that we know our principles are not magic? They're not going to answer all of the hard questions that we need to move forward, but they're a starting point for us in establishing what we stand for and what we all agree to build upon. So Google's principles came up a few years ago, and I'll walk through the history in a minute, but it's quite important for us between ethical AI and responsible AI. We want to really make sure that the theories and the critical components of AI responsibility are applied in a very systematic way in the ML lifecycle and development. So we started off in 2017 in the summer, where we had a cross-functional working group come together to come up with different principles and understand what it actually means to apply responsible AI in an organization such as ours. And by 2018, these principles were launched, and a team was also formed to help implement these principles. And that's been our story ever since. You know, from 2018, we've been working really hard to ensure that these principles are embedded in all of our products, as many as possible. And teams within Google are also aware of the AI principles and will walk by them. We also try to make sure that our principles adhere to regulations. So for example, the upcoming EU regulations talks about making sure that AI can be trusted on what it has to offer. And that's something that we try to make sure our principles apply to. All sorts of regulations, across the world, global regulations coming up. We want to make sure that our principles adhere to these regulations, and beyond that, we actually keep the users in mind. So we have 7 principles that we apply our AI systems to when we think about AI principles. It has to be socially beneficial to everyone. It mustn't reinforce or create unfair bias. It has to be built in safety. It has to be accountable as well, including privacy principles. And we have to think about scientific excellence and human rights. There are a few things we will not pursue as a company, Google. So we definitely will not pursue anything that would generate to either harm or injury or violate any internationally accepted norms or people's human rights. And we still make sure that this also adheres to the upcoming regulations and the existing regulations that exist today, where like the EC's regulation, the European Commission says AI systems should not be considered as a clear threat to the safety, livelihoods, or rights of people. And if there are any systems like these, they will be banned. So let's break down the AI principles a bit more and make it a bit more digestible according to the different components of responsible AI. Responsible AI falls across so many different components. Some of them are not even listed on here, like misinformation and factuality and accuracy. But within Google, we're trying to frame the different components that we address in the research organization by the principles that we have. So when we talk about unfair bias, for instance, that's really relating to fairness. And when we're talking about safety, we're thinking about safety, security, and robustness. And I'll go into a bit of definitions of some of these terms if you're new to the space and you want to learn more. We're thinking about talking about accountability. We're thinking about transparency and explainability and interpretability, or human-centered interaction, HCI, or human touch points. And of course, this goes without saying, we definitely need privacy included in any of the responsible AI frameworks that are being worked upon. So for example, let's look at fairness. Fairness is a term that doesn't just apply to machine learning, it's also seen in law and in other aspects of society. Lawyers strongly believe that fairness basically means protecting individuals and groups from discrimination or mistreatment. And within machine learning, fairness is a totally new emerging research area. It has so many nuances to it, so many definitions. It's very difficult, again, very similar to AI and responsible AI. It's quite difficult to give one definition of fairness that applies to all different use cases. There's also references to statistical bias in machine learning when we're talking about fairness. But basically what we're thinking about here is making sure that there's no unjust or prejudicial treatment of people that is related to sensitive characteristics or sensitive subgroups, such as race or income or sexual orientation or abilities or age or gender. And this is an important element of responsible AI. Now, beyond fairness, we also have privacy, which is quite key. And I give an example, we have people, users, and some of us are here today where we strongly believe our privacy has been eroded with AI. I'm not here to argue about that. I strongly believe that too, to a certain extent. But that's what responsible AI is hoping to address. And that's one of the things we look at in Google, is making sure that the privacy of our users are kept intact. And there's so many principles and frameworks underlying privacy. Another key element towards responsible AI is making sure that we protect the fundamental human rights of the people that these AI systems are deployed upon. So that means responsible AI as a field cannot just be strongly for ML engineers only or research scientists. It needs to be a multidisciplinary field where we have lawyers and human rights specialists and experts involved as well to actually assess the different systems that are being built and ensure that they adhere to people's human rights and they're not infringing upon them. This is so important, not just for the user, but for the reputation of those organizations and their products, the success of the products as well. We also talk about transparency. So this is a very quick definition for transparency. We all know that, it's a common saying and it's a common known fact that AI is like a black box. It's difficult to understand, especially when you start thinking about deep learning and neural networks. It's quite difficult to understand why they arrived at the decisions, even from the developers. So it's quite important that we have different frameworks that cover information on how the data was gathered, how this data was built, is it being documented, and what were the different choices and motivations that were designed, that these systems were designed for. Do the users know about the systems? How much do they know about the systems and the whole point in which it was created for? These are all elements that are actually very important when it comes to thinking about responsible AI frameworks when building your products or your ML models. The last but not the least that I'll cover today on definitions is data ethics. This is a very key and important topic and close to the heart of data scientists and ML engineers alike, where we want to make sure that we're gathering and protecting and using personally identifiable information when working on ML models. The question is, are there underlying principles that people adhere to when it comes to data ethics? And if they are, what are these principles? And at Google too, this is a major area that we're really concerned about and currently working on. So we have some general best practices when it comes to responsible AI that we say, one very important and fundamental part of it is making sure that you apply a human-centered design approach. It has to be human-centric. How much information are you getting from users? How much user studies are you carrying out within the ML workflow? Are you adhering to the ML workflow of defining what the problem is and testing it out before deploying it? It's also important to, test and reiterate on the work that you have been done. The way that users experience your system is very important. So it's important to always get feedback and have feedback loops in place. All right, so I'll move on to some quick couple of case studies, then I'll hand over to Mega. The case studies that I'm going to cite today are really from Google Cloud. And it's basically focused on the Vision API. There were two issues that were identified in the Vision API, and I'll just quickly talk about how they were discovered and how they were handled. So the first problem that we encountered was gender labels, where labeling is a very common practice. We know that if you're into ML and machine learning, you know that labeling is a key part of building out your database. And we use it to classify images and train machine learning models. A Googler was able to find out that the Cloud Vision API misidentified the person's gender, and the Googlers highlighted this to the Cloud Vision API team, and it kicked off an investigation. Now, in the process of the investigation, we covered what the cause and effect is. It's important to understand what could have led to this problem, what the causes were, and what the effects were. And it was clear that the labeling was a key issue with this problem. And one thing that we stand upon is, a person's gender should not be inferred based on their physical appearance, either by a human or by a model. What will the effects be? It could either lead to harm or restrict the people in which these wrong information is being placed upon, and add stereotypes as well. So the impact of making sure that you do cause and effect is quite important. And that was one of the ways we actually covered this investigation and did this analysis. Right, so there are a few mitigations employed. The good thing is that we're able to identify the issue. We also did some work with third-party assessments. There was a lot of product testing carried out. And we went back to the AI principles that the teams are founded upon, reinforcing Google's commitment to build products for everyone without generating unfair bias. And the next steps that the team made was to remove the male and female labels from the Vision API and replace them with non-gendered labels such as person. There are a few learnings and lessons learned, but the main thing is be mindful of the use case that you're using these labels for. For instance, if you're in the retail industry, you can refer to a person's fashion sense when analyzing foot traffic, as opposed to gender, for example. It's also important to have a cautious approach with general tools and build different tools and use cases if you're using gender based on those appropriate use cases. Don't just have a one size fits all. Now, the very next example that I'll give, still on the Vision API, is a thermometer gun example. This was an escalation that happened last year, early 2020. Now, as we know, Twitter is a very main informational resource, especially when there's trouble. So we had some escalations on Twitter and we got to see the escalation. If you can see the picture clearly, you have a Black man holding a handheld thermometer and we have an Asian person holding a handheld thermometer. Now, the problem is the AI system, the Vision API, identifies the object in the Black man's hand as a firearm, but for the Asian, it did not see it that way. And we got to hear about this from the tweet. So what we tried to do was manipulate the image and see what the results would be if we make the skin appear lighter. And when we did that, it changed the label from a gun to a tool, which was clearly shows that there's a problem with the Vision API when it comes to fairness. It's also important to think about societal context. And this error that the Vision API brought about really falls. It's something that is very close to the hearts of a lot of people, especially when you're thinking about racial justice and BLM, Black Lives Matter, especially in 2020. So it's quite important when deploying these models or working on your products to think about the effects and run these tests as you can. So Google has a lot of tools, which I'm not going to go into today, but you can go on the Google AI website or Google Cloud and get to see tools that Google has and other organizations within the industry like Microsoft, IBM. They all have a lot of tools when it comes to responsible AI. But I think it's super important to run tests on your ML models before deploying them. Look at your training data, your eval data sets, your golden data sets, and make sure that you have some form of safety classifiers built within these systems to avoid harms like this. And thinking beyond the users, which is absolutely important. You have to think about the success of your products and the success of your organization, including reputational damage that these sort of issues could cause. So how did we change this problem? How did we tackle this problem? We made sure we worked with a series of multiple teams. After trying to change the skin tone to see what the predictions would be, we carried out some counterfactual testing. And we found out that when we did that, gun was still a top 5 label response for all 3 images in all the different skin tones. But for some reason, the API demo did not surface this result. We also looked at saliency maps and we did some work around the skin tones again as well using saliency maps. Further work on the counterfactual testing, change of color of thermometer gun in the original image also caused the gun label to disappear. So just carrying out some more fairness tests within the same image led to a different sort of result and output from the API vision. We also did some stability testing as well. We looked at that training data. And at the very end, we found out that many images were mislabeled as gun, including things like camera. So we just had to make sure we had more precise labels in the data sets. And another way to tackle this problem is just having human raters involved in the data sets as well, just to make sure that they're a bit more human-centric and viable. And this is a nice segue into the next part of the presentation, robustness, because this topic, especially with this thermometer example, talks a lot about robustness with a socio-technical lens. So at this juncture, I'll hand it over to Nega. Nega, are you here?
Yes. Thank you, Toju. Thanks for the great presentation, Toju. And hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having us here. And here in this work, basically, I'm not going to present any work. I am going to ask you for your help in this research project that we are working on. So basically, robustness testing. Could you please I first want to introduce myself. Like, I'm Negar Rostamzadeh. I'm a senior research scientist at the Responsible AI org, and working with Toju on some of the problems related to testing, evaluation, and specifically robustness testing from a socio-technical perspective. So I'm part of this team of people who are working on this problem of robustness testing, mainly from a socio-technical perspective. Each of us have a very different perspective about the problem. We are coming from a machine learning background, socio-technical background, and we study this problem of testing and evaluation from a societal lens. And in this work, we want to actually learn from your perspective. And next slide, please. As I said, our long-term plan is to develop a framework which is appropriate for testing and in a responsible way. I mean, as Toju showcased some of the examples, we are also trying to see and predict where the system is going to make this kind of mistakes in order to avoid them before even getting involved in this kind of situation, which could be very harmful for many populations. And our short-term plan is to learn from you and your experience and expertise in designing and testing models in machine learning setup. So what we currently did, next slide, please. So what we currently did, sorry, I think like I missed one of the slides, but that's, so what we currently did, we actually studied the problem from a socio-technical perspective and what are the issues in society that should matter the most for us. So I will share a link for a survey that we want to ask you, and we really appreciate if you answer the survey. And we want to ask you about some of the questions with the machine learning lens and see what are the kind of practices and challenges that you may face in testing, or you might have recognized it earlier. And that's actually like one of the aspects that would be extremely helpful for us. So the instruction is very simple. First of all, like, please ask any questions that you have from me and Toju during filling this survey. In the beginning of the survey, if you could go to the next slide, please. There is an NDA to sign, and we would be really, it would be really helpful if you sign the NDA. The NDA is just basically let us to use the answers that you're giving to the questions for our research purposes. And in the future, hopefully to improve the products as well. And then the questions are about the challenges that you may face during the testing. So next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. And I will be sharing the link with you all.
Thank you very much, Nega. And if you have any questions, either for the responsible AI element or the robustness study element, now we've still got time, so feel free to ask.
Yes, Toju, we did receive some questions. So while everybody is waiting for the link, oh, the link is posted. So everyone, please participate. And in the meantime, Toju, the question is, one of the question is, what is the source for the slide about Black and Latino boys in 2001 were projected to go to jail or prison? So
I have to go through the slides now, and let's see which one. I guess that came from the case study.
From a case study. And then another question, would there ever be a case in which you see using AI to prevent crime, such as human trafficking or kidnappings, but potentially invade the criminal's privacy?
Okay. I just want to make sure I answer the first question.
Oh, of course.
So the source is from the racial justice website, EJI. I'm going to ping it in the link. EJI racial justice website. And I think they're a main group on racial justice. And bear with me. And I needed to repeat the second question so that I answer it correctly. Sorry.
Take your time. The second one. Would there be a case in which you see AI to prevent crime, such as trafficking or kidnapping, but potentially invade the criminal's privacy?
Yes. So I know AI is being used within that angle, but not to that extent. So like there's an organization that is using AI to help predict young people who could commit suicide. And basically what it has is just looking at analyzing and sifting through all the different documentation that most of the counselors have. Now, there's something we call AI for social good. And I believe that, this question refers to different products or initiatives that can be used for social good. Stopping human trafficking and crime is definitely important. It's an important problem that we have in the world today, and AI should be used to address that. And yes, it's going to invade on the criminal's privacy, definitely, if we're going to use it to accost criminals. Now, I don't think the AI industry is there yet, and it has to be done properly, right? Because right now we've seen so many instances where people of color have been arrested for crimes they did not commit because these facial recognition systems are mislabeling people, and they don't understand. They cannot recognize the different skin tone colors. There's lots of work even being done on skin tone colors as well in Google and outside Google. There's something called the Fitzpatrick scale, which has been a historical color formatting scale being used on vision and computer vision. But over time, we're seeing that it doesn't really address the different shades of people's skin color. Why I'm bringing that example, imagine if we use the Fitzpatrick scale to detect crime. That means more people may be arrested for crimes they did not commit. So it's really important, AI should go towards that angle. But right now, AI in criminal justice systems is not working right, and it needs to be, the wheel needs to be changed. It needs to be turned around before we even go in that direction.
Thank you, Toju. That is an awesome answer. Another question is, where do we get real and useful study materials of AI for data science, machine learning, or RL? I'm not sure what RL stands for, but
okay, I don't know what RL, maybe R. So it depends on the use case. When you say study materials, are you just thinking about understanding what's happening in the field of AI in general? If that's the case, Google has a lot of collabs. There's lots of research papers and documentations. You can also go, reinforcement learning. Okay, you can also go on Reddit. And for me, education is just Googling the keywords of what you're looking for and coming up with the different looking at the different results that come up. In terms of learning more about it, like going through courses, or if you want to be an ML engineer, which I feel most of you already are, then of course you can go on other websites like Coursera and all the different training websites. But I feel, Google, most of the top 5 organizations, they have lots of free resources on these different topics. So I think you can start off with them.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Oh yeah, reinforcement learning. I know RL means also in real life. And do you look for age discrimination, Toju?
Yeah, so that's definitely one of the subgroups to look at in fairness when we're carrying out fairness tests on the ML models. Age is a very important subgroup for us.
Fantastic. A question to Negar: is the link only for USA, for people from the USA?
Unfortunately, yes, the current link is just for people in the US. It's because of the details of NDA and the different set of regulations that we should go through. So for now, this is just for the US. And I apologize for this.
So they need to be physically in the US. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. What about the intersection of AI, ML, and law when it comes to protect civil rights, like protecting the Fourth Amendment of the constitutional rights in the USA, which is the kind of privacy, or is it the right to privacy?
Yeah, that's an important part. And if you remember during the presentation, I talked about the importance of having law and human rights experts in these conversations. So like in our team in Google, we do have a human rights team that look into the human rights elements of these AI systems that we're building. If we're thinking about building data sets and we're thinking about building data sets based on human values, we bring these people into these conversations. So it's a key and parcel element of responsible AI, and any organization that is working on a responsible AI that does not have the human rights arm included in it, then they're not doing it correctly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. More questions are coming in. How do you think having government leaders who are knowledgeable about modern technology affect our policies around AI, ML, tech ethics and laws, or is it solely up to the private companies right now?
To be fair, like when it comes to responsible AI frameworks, like everyone has a voice to say. Everyone should contribute to this. This includes policymakers, includes you and I, members of society, includes tech companies, includes the research scientists. It's not something that I would say just belongs to people in this field, because the problem is if we do that, you find out that the policies that come out do not address the needs of every member of society. There are lots of fights that have gone on recently with government, like there's something called the Siri case in the Netherlands, which was a case where the government was using AI for social welfare, and the laws that it came up with was discriminating against people from certain postcodes. And we found out that those people from those certain postcodes were from lower socioeconomic statuses. So that's the harm with leaving these policies just for one group of people. They're not going to think about the whole world because they're not in the whole world. You only think about it from the lens that you're used to. So it's something that everyone should have a voice and a say in it. And there's lots of collaboration beginning to happen. The World Economic Forum has a branch within AI that's trying to work with tech companies to come up with different policies. We haven't seen a global policy yet. I don't know if we'll ever get there. And that could be another problem, is policies across different countries will be different. And even if these AI systems are being deployed and adopted by people across the world, some of these policies may not protect certain people in society. So there's still lots of work being done in the area. Still quite new, still quite nascent, but everyone has a voice to say.
Fantastic. Yes, everyone please contribute to the survey. You can make a difference.
That's the first place.
And another question, that one is to Bill, where the recordings will be shared after.
Yes, the session recorded, it will be shared on the YouTube. You will get emails after the event with the link to the YouTube channel. We're also going to post in the Slack. If you want to see it, later on you can just go to YouTube, search the AI camp. You should be able to find our channel. So all of the sessions will post on the YouTube over there.
Fantastic, YouTube. Does anybody want to ask the question, any questions or comments live? We will be happy to unmute you.
Just a reminder, we have multiple ways to post the questions. One in the Slido, the link is posted in the chat, and also you can just post in the chat box or in the Slack. We will monitor and moderate them. And if you prefer to speak and ask questions, you also can raise your hand. You can speak and also make comments or follow-up questions.
Oh, there is a comment that the chat history is lost every time they reconnect.
Yeah, that's true. I will repost it again right now.
Sure, let me post the Q&A. So the Q&A is bit.ly DevFest-Q&A. Oops, sorry, let me post it to you. Is there a way to pin this? I also usually use other video meetings. I'm not sure if this can be pinned to the top.
All right, if no further more questions to the speakers, I would like thanks Toju and Nagar for the presentations and the surveys, share the resources over there. If you have other questions later on, feel free to post in the chat and also in the Slack. We will get them answered.
Before Toju and Nagar go, we actually did receive more questions.
Sure, yeah.
Do you still have a few minutes or?
That's fine, yeah.
Yeah, another question. How do you test or validate the tax extract from the image that contain discriminations? Do you have automatic system to verify or by manual test?
We have different tools, and you can find these on the Google Cloud website. So one of them is counterfactual testing. So these are tools. It wasn't manual extractions or testing. Like, we actually use the tools that we have available.
And then a follow-up: if you test automatically, how do you define the rules of discrimination?
Yeah, so I think it's best to read about the features of the tool and what, the pros and the cons, because it depends on the tool, right? We have so many different tools. There's fairness indicators. There's you probably will need to do remediation. I don't want to speak all of these hefty words if you don't have background knowledge on fairness. but ideally the tools should have a little short blurb that explains how to use it and, you know, what use cases it's best for. So I'll suggest just do that. And again, you know, this is a global problem. So Google is not the only company that has tools. Microsoft still has their own Fairness 360 toolkit. So you can have a look at the different tools available and see what the use case is, and just educate yourself a little bit more about how these tools work and what use cases you need to use them for.
Fantastic. And more questions? Any course of AI ML provided by Google for somebody who is refresher or starter?
Yeah, we have the ML Fairness Crash Course, and that's free. It's available externally as well. So if you just, you know, Google those terms, ML Fairness Crash Course, you'll be able to see it. So that's a good one to get your head started in the game. Yeah, Nega, I don't know if I touched a little bit on the age limit discrimination question already. Well, thanks for raising it.
Oh yeah, I think I found the course. I can post the link in the chat as well as Slack. Oh, somebody else found it as well. Negar commented that Mark is on the call, who is I had a pleasure to meet Mark Diaz. He's also a research scientist at the Responsible AI team. Mark, would you like to say something or share any